And this is the very first musical speaking, as I mentioned, musically speaking. It's a new bi-weekly hour-long live session where I'll be welcoming Canadian stars of the classical world to play for us all, to talk to me, to talk to you about themselves, to field questions from me, but more importantly, to field questions from all of you. So I hope this will be an opportunity in the coming weeks and months to get to know these stars more intimately as they join us from their homes and get a feel for what inspires them and what drives them. We have a really exciting lineup in our first few shows over the coming weeks, but in the coming hour, I'll spill the beans about who that's going to be in the next few weeks. And whether you're joining from our Canada Performs platform on the NAC's website, or you've joined via my Facebook page, please don't be shy to share any questions you have for us. Down on Facebook, you'll see me pop up in an icon. That's actually my wonderful assistant, Kelly Simmons. It's her birthday today. Happy birthday, Kelly. And she's fielding everything, and she'll pass that through to me here in London. So that's her in the chat box. And in the final segment of this hour, we'll field as many questions of yours as we possibly can. Apologies in advance if we don't get through them all, but we'll try and get through as many possible. So I'm thrilled to welcome our first guest for this series. He's one of the greatest living violinists, without a doubt. He's a Grammy and Juno award-winning virtuoso. He's celebrated in all corners of the earth. He's a kind and thoughtful man. He's a close musical partner of our orchestra, and he's a very dear friend. Moreover, at the end of this year, he'll be joining the NAC Orchestra as our very first artist in residence for 2 seasons. And I'm hoping that in the course of this hour, we can talk a little bit about what that means to him and what it means to you. What is an artist in residence, wherever it happens? So over the coming hour, we'll be hearing him perform some beautiful music from his home. We'll get to know his thoughts on music and life and have the opportunity to ask him lots of questions. So without further ado, originally from Brandon, Manitoba, but joining us from Ellenton, near Tampa, Florida in the US, please welcome the one and only Jimmy Ennis. James Ennis. Hi, James.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you. Good to be
How are
here.
you doing? How's the family?
We're all hanging in there. It's a strange time. We're certainly luckier than many to all be healthy and all be together. And yeah, it's a weird thing. Everyone is dealing with this, and in a way that sort of shared experience has been sort of comforting to me at the strangest times. Because no, it's not easy. There's no work, the cancellation of all these things that as musicians we've been looking forward to for so long, that it takes a mental toll. But really just trying to look on the bright side and enjoy all this time at home and this time with my family. And
Where,
yeah.
where were you when it all kind of went down? Did you have to fly home, or were you at home already?
Well, actually, my very last trip, my last performance was in Barcelona, and
Mhm.
that's yeah. And it's funny, is we were staying with very good friends over there, and we were discussing the situation almost every day, and we were almost every day saying, "Well, good thing it doesn't seem to have come to Spain." And obviously, that changed
Right.
pretty much right after we left. I think we flew home on the 2nd of March. I was home for a couple of days. My whole family was with me over there in Spain. It was a great trip, and then a few days later, I went up to New York to rehearse actually with my string quartet. We had some concerts in Connecticut, and it all happened so quickly. That was that first week of March where, at least in the United States, things were developing hour by hour, it seemed. And we were rehearsing, I suppose it was on a Thursday, and we were going to, maybe it was a Friday morning, we were heading up to Connecticut for our first performance. And like within an hour, everything changed. And we were booking flights to basically escape from New York. And I flew home, and I believe that was the 8th or ninth, and I've been home ever since.
Good.
How
Well, I'm
about you?
glad you're safe. Oh,
You were down there, weren't you?
I was down in the other hemisphere, in the southern hemisphere. I was down on tour in Australasia, and I was actually in New Zealand, and then they shut down, and I jumped on a flight home and managed to get back to my family. But I'm also devastated. All the concerts I've been missing, in particularly in Ottawa with my orchestra, we
Yeah.
had some great programs. But we all of us who are safe have to count ourselves lucky. Now,
Yeah.
listen, we have a lot to fit in the hour, and I want to, for the audience that doesn't know you. I thought I'd start off with something a little bit different, okay? Because we want to hear you play shortly. But I'm going to start off with basically a quick fire round, Okay.
Okay.
So the rules of this, if it's like obviously a one-word answer, try and give a one-word answer. And if it's more than a one-word answer, try and be as brief as possible, and you get one veto. All right.
Okay. One. All right. I'll use it wisely.
Sunrise or sunset?
Sunset.
City or countryside?
Countryside.
Classic or modern?
Classic.
Do you prefer to do the cooking or the eating?
The eating.
Oh, that's an interesting one for a performer, actually. I thought you were going to say cooking.
Well, I like to cook, but I mean, I think I cook because then I like to eat it. So.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. Good answer. Fiction or nonfiction?
Fiction.
Federer or Nadal?
Federer.
It's the correct answer. Describe yourself. Describe yourself in 3 words.
Veto.
Oh, okay. Which sports teams do you support?
Boston Red Sox, Winnipeg Jets.
Cool. If you weren't a musician, what would your dream job be?
I think I'd like to work for NASA or JPL.
Cool. And what job would you be least good at?
Well, I've discovered that the job I would be least good at is elementary school teacher.
With your kids.
Yes, exactly. The job I occasionally attend.
It's a very hard one. It's a very hard
thank goodness
one.
my
All right,
wife is really good at that.
Yeah, I can imagine. Cat or dog?
Dog.
Driving or walking?
Ooh. Can I choose the car? I think I'd say walking.
We're going to get a lot of angry messages, but you can. Yeah.
I'd say walking.
Emotion or reason?
Myself, I'd say reason.
It sounds like you're about to say something else, but you're not.
No.
Okay.
I don't think my video froze.
If you could meet anyone in history and talk to them, who would it be?
Ooh. I think it'd be hard not to say Jesus. It'd be interesting to talk to him.
Ooh. Well, that's topical at this time of year. So, okay. How old were you when you left home?
17.
What's your favorite hobby? If you have one.
I'd say my favorite hobby is probably anything sort of sporty because I so rarely have the chance to do it.
Okay. We're nearly there, James. Thank you for persevering with me. Do you have a favorite joke?
Oh, yeah, not one I can tell here, but one that you've probably heard before.
I thought as much. That's funny. Okay. What's your greatest fear?
Greatest fear, I would say, is something happening to my children.
Yeah. Yeah. That's pretty understandable. Okay. These are the last 3, and they're all kind of similar. What 3 books? You can make it 2 or 1 if you don't want to have 3 of any of these. Which 3 books would you take to a desert island?
I'd take David Copperfield.
The Magician, obviously.
Sure, right. I would take The Razor's Edge, and I would take A Brief History of Time because every time I read it, I feel like I get 1% more of what he's talking about.
Building.
Yeah.
And what about 3 movies?
3 movies. Oh man, that is hard. I would say Dumb and Dumber, Interstellar, and Tropic Thunder.
Great choices. Okay, and the last of this quick fire round is what 3 pieces of music would you take to a desert island?
I'm tempted to cheat here and just choose pieces that are really long.
Oh, so you have more from them, I see. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's clever.
Yeah, but I think maybe I'd have to take Beethoven's Sixth Symphony, Prokofiev, Romeo and Juliet, and maybe the Sixth Brandenburg Concerto. I never get tired of that. I don't think I'd choose violin pieces because I sort of have them,
Yeah, yeah,
I
sure.
need them. Yeah.
Okay. Well, you've ended with Bach, and that's a perfect segue. It's as if you knew what you're about to play for us. James, these musically speakings are about hearing great performers speak about themselves, but also play. I believe you have three pieces for us today. Could you introduce the first one and maybe just say a few words about it for us?
Sure. Well, the first bit I thought I would play is indeed Bach. Violinists are very lucky to have Bach, and nowadays I feel like any instrumentalist that has a wealth of solo repertoire is lucky because that's the thing. Obviously, we're missing the most is the
Mm.
opportunity to collaborate with our colleagues. Bach wrote three partitas and three sonatas for solo violin, so I'm going to play the third movement, the slow movement Largo, from his sonata number 3. And excuse me while I don't like playing sitting down, so
Okay,
I'm just
that's
going to
okay.
myself.
So James is going to reset, and while he does that, just a reminder for those of you watching, if you have any questions at all, and as you've seen from the fire round, they can be kind of off-piste questions. If you have any questions at all, please do send them to us. Kelly Simmons is receiving, and she'll be passing things through to me, and we'd love to hear from you. Thank you, James.
You're very welcome.
Gosh, I've missed that. I've missed that so much. And it's interesting that you talk about Bach and us musicians having, or you said us, you violinists had that at this time, and you're very lucky to have it. Um, I was a cellist, and I haven't played the cello since 2005, 2006. And when people ask me, do you miss the cello? Um, I always have the same answer. I miss two things. One is chamber music, but
Mhm.
the other thing is playing solo Bach because there's an intimacy and sort of cathartic nature to that experience as an individual with the instrument and with his music that is difficult to describe actually. And I think it's if there's any good reason to pick up an instrument and try to start to learn, it's Bach.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Anyway, I'd love to. Sorry, please.
no, no. It just that echo your own thoughts. It's a great luxury to be able to spend time with something that is just such a great and ideal reflection of the beauty of humanity, not to go too overboard, but really, I mean, we were very lucky as musicians to surround ourselves with the greatest examples of human achievement. It's humbling every day, and I think that it's also it's an incredible thing to have Bach because it will always push you to be better than you can be because Bach's always going to be better than me. So I want to try to raise my game. You know what I mean?
Hmm,
And it can bring joy to everyone from the absolute beginner to the most seasoned professional.
absolutely. So listen, we in this next section before you play for us again, I wanted to dig into your early life a bit. I mean, you tour across the globe to all the capitals. You've won Grammys and Junos, and you perform along the finest musicians and orchestras in the world. And I've been wondering how this came to be from your beginnings in Brandon, Manitoba, and we've received a couple of questions that are exactly that. So in advance, we've been talking to the Sistema program in Ottawa called Orchestra. It's an amazing program. Anybody watching that
Yeah.
doesn't know it, look it up. Talking to youth orchestras and the Sistema in New Brunswick and other people. And we have a question here from Nia, who's a violinist with the Orchestra Centre Town Hub, which is actually for us both, but this is for you. When did you start studying and pursuing music? And a second question I'll give you with that is from Ariana and Ayan, who play violin and viola respectively from Centre Town Hub in an orchestra. Why did you choose the violin, and how did you know you wanted to pursue a career in it? So if you're able to sort of put those together and tell us about your youth, it'd be great.
Yeah, well, I started playing when I was just a little bit before my fifth birthday, and it was kind of natural, I think, for me to get involved in music because there was always music in my house. My father was a trumpet player. He was the trumpet professor at Brandon University in Brandon, Manitoba, Canada, for many years. My mother had been a ballet dancer. She actually danced in Le Grand Ballet in Montreal, which was my parents who are Americans. That was their first experience with living in Canada. That was before they ended up moving to Manitoba. Um, so it was natural for me to be involved in the arts and to get involved with music because it was what I saw around me all the time. And I mean, I know Alex, obviously your parents are both wonderful musicians, and you see you see that around you. It becomes a part of your world. You want to get involved, and so that's easy to explain. The violin part is a little harder to explain because no one in my family played the violin, and it's a little bit of a family mystery why it is that I chose that particular instrument. I do remember seeing Itzhak Perlman on Sesame Street and thinking that he was awesome. So maybe that was that. I don't know, but I apparently from a very young age I had made the connection between this instrument made those sounds that I was hearing from my parents' record
Mm,
collections. Like they used to sit me. I mean, it's Brandon, Manitoba. It's cold in the winter, so they would sit me up on top of the radiator in the wintertime, which was right next to one of the stereo speakers. And that was basically how they would keep me out of trouble. Like for hours, I would just sit up there and listen to the music very intently. And I certainly, like I said, I recognized what sound was making or what instrument was making that sound. And so I asked for what seemed like a long time for a violin, and eventually I got one.
Fantastic. And do your, I mean, do you as a, how do you do this with your family with music? Do you, I'm asking myself the same question with our
Yeah.
little boy, you know, how intense I need to be or not. How are you approaching that?
I mean, it's so hard. I mean, I'd love to have that conversation in more detail with you. I mean, it's my 8-year-old daughter plays the violin, and we have a lot of fun with it. And my 5-year-old son plays the piano, and we have fun with that too. Musicians as parents, that's a really, really tricky one. I mean, actually, the conversation I want to have is not really with you, but it's with your parents because they obviously did it perfectly. Two incredibly successful musicians who raised another one. I mean, you hear so often about the dangers of professional musicians pushing their children too hard, but I've certainly come across a number of cases where they were so afraid of pushing too hard that they didn't push enough. And that's, I mean, in a way, that's almost more sad. You meet kids that are older that say, I had every opportunity to learn an instrument. I had these musicians in the house, and they were so afraid of doing the wrong thing that I missed out, and I lost that gift to my life. So I don't know. I do my best. My kids.
It's interesting. Sorry, go
Sorry,
ahead.
I was just gonna finish to say that my kids both still like music and still like me, so I'm not messing it up that badly yet.
Oh yeah, it's a very interesting question. I think my parents gave me a lot of space with it. I mean, I learned instruments from a young age, and they worked a lot with me. But there came a point, particularly in my teenage years, where they said, "Look, you're either dedicated or you're not. You're going to have to learn to apply yourself." And when I work with young people in different places, whether it's in Canada, whether it's in Germany, the UK, or wherever I've been, that's one of the main transferable skills I find in music that you learn at a young age. It's one of the reasons that it's, from my perspective, so important to give kids access, is because you you need to discover, in order to go anywhere really on an instrument, to discover what it is to love it and have a personal connection with it, because other people forcing you to do it, it's kind of like any subject, I guess. But kids that start to excel at music learn a kind of self-discipline and the idea of setting themselves short-term goals and finding a way to want to go to the instrument, that is actually very useful and important in other areas. Sorry, there's an emergency vehicle going by. I hope it's not too disturbing.
Well, I totally agree. I mean,
But listen,
there are certain aspects about, I mean, people, I don't feel any need to defend what we do, but I think there's unquestionable great value in music. But I would say to supplement that I've met a lot of people who studied various subjects. Maybe they even studied them quite intensely, for some vocation that they thought they were going to pursue. And they say, yeah, it turned out that was just not me. And I hated it. And that was a total waste of time. And I've never once met anyone who studied music with any seriousness whatsoever that doesn't look back on it as being a really wonderful part of their lives and something that they were able to transfer to other areas of their lives, and something that gave them great joy and great meaning to their life as time went by. So you really can't go wrong with exposing kids to music. When was the last time you met someone that was like, yeah, I learned how to play the piano, but I really wish I didn't? Like,
yeah, I saw an advert that did exactly that. It's like, oh, damn, I wish I hadn't learned to play the piano.
Yeah, right.
But I just seen a question come through here from Lennox, which is an interesting one. It says, I know James's mom was a dancer. You just mentioned it. How does movement inform musicality, and which musical pieces best exemplify that relationship? And of course, your wife is a dancer too. It's a big part of your life. It's an interesting question.
Yeah, I mean, it really is an interesting question. It's very hard to answer, but I mean, there are things that are just inherent in people having to do with pulse and pacing and aesthetics. And I really do believe that there are cross relationships between all the arts when it comes to this. I don't know that I could um, pick any one particular example because, in a way, you could pick every example. I think for me, a huge part of performing art is pulse and pacing. And that applies to dance, and it applies to music, and it applies to theater. I mean, frankly, pulse and pacing, it applies to
Life.
literature. I mean, it applies to life, exactly. So I think the interrelationships between all the art forms are very strong and very important. And just one thing that's been great about being around ballet all my life is just there's so much incredible music that was written for the ballet, and it's been great being around that.
Absolutely. Just before we move on to a little bit more music, I have a couple more questions. Did you, within your youth in Canada, have idols and mentors, sort of Canadian specifically ones, or were they really global mentors? People you looked at on video, film, recording. Do you have recollections of that?
Well, there were great heroes of mine that were both very local and that were really not. Brandon is a fascinating place. It's not a large city, but for our Canadian viewers here, I mean, Canada is a unique country. There are these centers because the country is so large and so spread out. There are places that are not necessarily big, but they service these huge geographical areas. And Brandon, when I was growing up, was probably only 35,000 people, but among other services, it has this great university, and the School of Music was a very important, well, is a very important school of music. And my violin teacher there, Francis Chaplin, was one of my greatest heroes. And the members of the faculty at the School of Music were both family and also people that I really looked up to and idolized. But then on the other hand, Brandon was isolated enough that the people, the great stars of the world were not often coming through on their schedules because it wasn't kind of a practical destination. So there were people like I mentioned earlier, seeing Itzhak Perlman on Sesame Street. I mean, he was such a hero of mine growing up. Pinka Zuckerman, of course, your predecessor at the National Arts Centre. It was an incredible thrill when I reached my teens and was able to actually meet these people and interact with these people. And the fact that I can now think of them as friends and colleagues is still kind of an amazing thing to me. But growing up, so I was going to say that growing up in Brandon, I think was a great blessing for me because there was this incredibly strong musical culture that also was small enough that I received so much personal attention from really this entire community of musicians.
That's interesting. Sorry, I've just seen an interesting question come in. Many interesting questions are coming in. I'm sorry I'm not able to get to all of them because I'd be constantly interrupting you. There's one question here from an extraordinary journalist in Ottawa, a very brilliant man and a great friend, Paul Wells. He's talking about current situations, saying even jurisdictions that reopen will probably sharply curtail large gatherings for many months. So we're going off here onto coronavirus and COVID. How can arts organizations adjust? It's a very, very big question. And I might suggest that in the next segment, where we're maybe going to talk a little bit about your relationship with the NAC and the idea of an artist in general, an artist in residence in any community around the world and what kind of resonance that has. We could talk about that. But I'm going to pocket that question and we'll come back to it. So maybe while you're playing the next piece, you can be distracted with that in mind.
Okay.
A final question before we hear you play. I've been sort of reaching out to a lot of young people by video and other ways in the last few weeks, trying to offer any advice I could give while they're at home and not able to play with ensembles. And one of them was sort of connected with what you were just saying about recordings and even Sesame Street, that I've been suggesting to them to use the time to get to know pieces they know are coming up by listening to them. Because if you're singing in an orchestra, there are so many distractions, and having frames of reference and points of reference, different recordings, different ways of doing things is very useful. If you were, talking to a young person nowadays who's stuck in their home, who isn't able to meet up with their ensembles, perhaps maybe specifically string players, if you wish, do you have any pieces of advice that you'd offer of how to sort of stay focused and do something productive?
I think this applies for all times, but I think particularly now it's important to remember that we don't always sound the way we think we sound. I think one of the most important things about playing with people and playing for people and working with a teacher is that you begin to understand a little better that disconnect. And I think right now, what people should be doing, I mean, we live in an incredible time, right? With technology. I mean, anyone who's watching this obviously has access to a computer, a smartphone, something like that, which makes them very lucky. And record yourself. Listen to yourself play, try to learn a certain kind of objectivity, because what I'm really afraid for a lot of students is that there's going to be a lot of really bad habits developing, because it's very difficult for us to avoid that. We work at something, we play it, we feel it a certain way, and we think, well, I'm feeling it, so surely it sounds that way. And of course, sadly, it really doesn't a lot of the time. And I feel, I'd be curious to get your thoughts on this, Alex, but I feel like a big part of learning as you become a professional musician is learning objectivity about what it's, because you're not playing for yourself. You're playing for other people. And how does the message that's inside come across to those people? And being able to listen to yourself is very, very important. Even if you've just got a phone, just record yourself playing. What does it sound like? Is that what I want to sound like? You'll be surprised. I guarantee it. I mean, I'm surprised all the time.
Well, I mean, firstly, it's one of the pieces of advice I give to, beginner conductors and young conductors is, you have to get to a stage where you're not thinking about conducting, you're listening. And that's the biggest problem for a lot of people when they're doing, this and there's a lot of sound and everything else, is to put your ear out into the hall and really listen to what's happening. So that this is all automatic and instinctive and intuitive, and it's not using any of your kind of concentration, your conscious concentration, so you can really focus on sound. So yes, I agree. And similarly, I remember with my cello teacher in Germany, I would go in and I'd play something and I'd miss shifts that at home I was hitting and blah, blah, blah. And he said, well, firstly, you're probably not hitting them all the time at home. You're just remembering the times that you do. And secondly, here, it's all about focus. You're in a different state of mind. And he taught me during the years I was with him something that is so valuable for everything that one does, which is that it's better to spend just a few minutes of true focus on something than a long time when you're not really there. And that's one of the things I've been saying to the kids on these videos, is that even if you only play 2 notes, but every point of the note is perfect and centered, that's way more valuable than playing 100 notes that are a little bit diffuse and out of whack. Anyway, we want to hear you play some more.
100% agree. Absolutely.
Great.
That's 100% agree. It is so crucial not to reinforce an unrealistic way of performing. I mean, people, they're like, I don't get it. I practiced this in the practice room to the point where I didn't even have to think about it. I could just do it automatically. And it's like, well, that's a dumb way of practicing it, because when are you going to be on stage where you're going to be so calm that you're like, oh, I'm not even thinking about it? It's like, of course you're thinking about it. You're hyper concentrated. So practice being hyper concentrated. That's the only way that you can actually practice a performing experience. Okay, now I'll play.
Yeah. Do you want to tell, as you walk, can you tell us a little bit about the piece?
Sure. Well, this is actually a piece sort of from my childhood that has some real Manitoba connections. This is by a Canadian composer, Russian-born Canadian composer named Sophie Carmen Eckhardt Gramate, who moved to Winnipeg actually in, I believe it was the early 1950s. And I knew her husband, Ferdinand Eckhardt, quite well as a young man. There's a contemporary music competition at Brandon University called the A-grade competition, the Eckhardt Gramate competition. She wrote a set of 10 caprices for solo violin. The publication was actually edited by my dear teacher, Francis Chaplin, who also recorded them all. This is the 10th. It is called Calaca, which is lament. It's a piece that I haven't actually played in a long time, and I'm sort of missing it. And that's one advantage of this situation, is you can dig out old music and play through. So hope you enjoy it. I'm afraid I am not getting any audio. Are you still there?
I'm there. Can you hear me
Oh,
okay?
yeah, I got you now. Yeah.
I was saying it's a very interesting piece, a very moving piece.
Yeah, yeah. She was a fascinating person. You know, she was a great violinist, a great pianist, obviously great composer. Fascinating woman that unfortunately died before I was born, just by a couple of years. But she had, of course, having lived in Manitoba for many years, I knew a lot of people that knew her, and they spoke of her as really a one of a kind.
Hmm. Wow. So I'm gonna, before we move on to sort of an area that I want to talk about with you, which is the artist in residence, a couple of questions coming in. So Lily, who's a saxophone player for the Vanier Hub of Orchestra, asks a question which is always kind of difficult to answer, I find. Where do you get your inspiration from?
Well, I would say the inspiration is in the music itself, and if I don't find any inspiration in the piece of music, then it's really best that I don't play it, because I think that really the only way that one can effectively communicate a message is if you feel at the time that you are completely convinced of what it is you're doing and what it is you're saying as an artist. And there are some pieces, obviously, let's be realistic. There are some pieces that we play that are among the closest things to our heart, and there are other pieces that maybe aren't. But it becomes our jobs, I think, that at the time we're doing it, that piece means everything.
Yeah, I
And
couldn't I couldn't agree more. I'm actually yet to find a piece where once I'd invested time in it to really get to know it, it didn't then give me a lot back. Even those pieces
yeah,
where I thought, oh, this is not my thing off the top. Once you get into a piece, even if it's sort of an abstruse language, you end up empathizing with it. And there are some pieces I perform. I mean, for example, my wife will come to the concert and she's hearing it for the first time and she'll go, "What was that?" And I'll say, "What do you mean, what was that?" It's an amazing piece, but I guess it's like some books or maybe some sports, right? You don't know anything about them. Like, I'm British. I love cricket, but talk to any North American about cricket and their eyes glaze over and, you know, anyway. So, another question here. What are your routines during lockdown?
oh, routine during lockdown. I mean, it's hard to know what the routine is. I mean, the only real routine that I have, I suppose, is sort of based around my children's schedules. My kids are doing this remote schooling, I suppose, like probably everyone else. So
Mm,
they get started at 8. So I'm up at 7:30, and I usually use that time because my wife is such a superhero and so great with the kids that, I mean, frankly, she's better with them in that context than I am. So I
yeah.
basically use that time to practice, to try to learn new repertoire. I put a list together of pieces that I wanted to sort of get my fingers around during this lockdown, and slowly but surely, I'm sort of grinding through that list. And then, other than that, I try to stay somewhat active, have some physical activity. And I try to have something every day that I can look back on the day and feel like it was a good day. It was a successful day. And, it's just these little victories. Because, as performers, we, we have these markers in our lives that allow us to keep track of time. And I found that that's very, very strange. Like,
Right.
I think about where I was gonna be on a particular day, and like, I was supposed to be in San Francisco right now, and that strikes me as really weird because it doesn't seem that we're there yet, but
Yeah.
because time has sort of been flying, I find it hard to keep
Yeah.
track.
Yeah. I have my rehearsal schedules keep popping up on my phone. I'm like, yeah, no, that's not happening.
Yeah. I know it's
Um,
demoralizing, right? Like all these things like,
I
don't
know.
forget you're
But
playing
but it's funny
Mozart
that
3 with San Francisco Symphony. It's like, no.
right. It's funny, the first thing I did though, when I realized what was happening, was I wrote a list of pieces that I don't know that I want to know that I've never had time to kind of get to know. So
Yeah.
it's funny how we sort of. So listen, I want to talk about this really exciting news that you're joining our creative team, our artistic team at the National Arts Centre, as our first ever artist in residence. And because we have an audience from lots of different places listening to us, and not everybody will know the NAC Orchestra. Could we start by talking a little bit more abstractly about what you think an artist in residence stands for? How an artist in residence can serve a community, both broad in the sense of a city or a region, but also, in this case, an orchestra.
Well, I've had the good luck to have had these artist in residence titles in various places. I mean, I was supposed to be the artist in residence with the Dallas Symphony this year. I was going to have spent really most of the last month in Dallas, but very sadly that didn't happen. It seems to mean different things in different places, and I think what I'm really excited about for our collaboration is that the nature of the National Arts Centre Orchestra is unique. This is a national orchestra that, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, it really does fulfill its mission of. I mean, we've been together on tours across the country, and I've been with the orchestra up to the far north, and the orchestra does such a great job of really playing an important role in the musical life from coast to coast to coast. And I am really looking forward to being a part of that. You know, often being an artist in residence can mean just going up and playing a few concerts, or maybe having a certain role with the artistic planning of some projects, and maybe working with some local students. But I think we have the opportunity to do much more than that. And
I
you know,
agree.
the musical program, certainly around the Ottawa capital region, I look forward to working with those students and with those young people. But I also look forward to the opportunity through the NAC's umbrella of reaching, whether it is physically or virtually, uh, musicians, young musicians, old musicians, music lovers across the whole country. And
Mm.
certainly the discussions that we've had so far, I mean, there are some very exciting things that will be happening in a very traditional way. You know, we've got our concerts together both in Ottawa, and I think I'm allowed to say that we're performing together at Carnegie Hall in New York next season. And of course, that's a great highlight for any performer. But quite apart from that, you know, the things that I think we're looking at in terms of cross-disciplinary activities, working with young people working in education, potentially whether it's with larger ensembles or smaller ensembles, playing music that is a little off the beaten path in places that are a bit off the beaten path, and exploring how best as an organization the National Arts Centre can serve Canada as a whole. I mean, that's it's a unique opportunity for me. I'm very grateful to you and the team
Oh.
for bringing me on board.
Well, we're very excited, and yeah, I mean that sesquicentennial tour, the 100 Canada 150 tour we did to every province and territory is one of the most inspirational experiences in my life. I have to say, the one of the interesting things about classical music in general is that for a lot of people it evokes, I think, through the word classical, a kind of staid atmosphere. Um, the irony of which is that all of the great composers I can think of, particularly 20th century, was once the world became more interconnected with recordings and with travel, they did nothing but reach to the other ends of the world to try and grab inspiration. And I have to say, when I was on that tour, I was thinking about, in fact, we had lots of great Canadian composers touring with us as well and being involved in that, but the inspiration just within Canada, the musical inspiration you can find from the different languages is something very special. But of course, it is the second biggest country physically on Earth after Russia. And going back to Paul Wells's question, which is about, you know, our building and arts institutions, even once everything reopens, there will probably be limits on how many people we can fit into a room to start with. How do we adjust? It's actually a question that's been in my mind since I started with the orchestra, not necessarily specific to coronavirus, but how can an orchestra that's rooted in a city like Ottawa, and it could be anywhere else in the world. How do you reach out over hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands of miles to communities and really engage with them? Have you had any experiences there? Do you have any thoughts about the best way to do it nowadays?
Well, I mean, it's everyone's struggling with these questions, not just of what to do, but how to do it effectively. I find like there's a lot of content going out right now with the very best intentions that is not not necessarily fully thought through, but everybody's trying, and we're very fortunate. I mean, can you imagine this type of world situation at a time when we didn't have the technology that we have today? Um, I think that certainly everyone in the arts world is working hard to try to marry their artistic projects with the existing technology that we have, while fully realizing that live music is something that it can't be replaced. Any performer, I think, would agree that when we play for an audience, it is not a one-way avenue of communication. And that is something that is probably irreplaceable in any sort of a virtual setting. But I suppose it's not the point of this conversation is not for me to talk about the things we can't do, but the things that we can do.
Exactly.
And really, tomorrow night I'm doing a master class for the San Francisco Conservatory, and it's really quite amazing. These wonderful young people have been pre-taping their performances, and I've been receiving them over the last 24 hours, and I'm going to go through them and meet with them and work with them and talk with them. And this is a wonderful thing that we can absolutely do right now. And as the situation develops, maybe there will be restrictions on larger gatherings that go on longer than restrictions on smaller gatherings. I don't work for the government. I am not a scientist, but I'm just saying that depending on whatever happens, I think the musicians will be able to adapt, because we don't have to just stick by the model that we've always used. Then one thing that I love about the National Arts Centre Orchestra is my most memorable experiences with the National Arts Centre have involved large orchestral things. They've involved small chamber music things. They've involved duos with my great friend, your concertmaster Yosuke Kawasaki. I've enjoyed working with people one-on-one. I've enjoyed working with groups. I've enjoyed the adventure, and that's really what we're going to have in these next few months, is just a big adventure and try to make the best of it.
I agree, and yeah, I agree also that this orchestra is artistically as well placed as I can think that I can think of, because of precisely that. I mean, it's something I've always admired so much in the playing, is that it's something that's thrown around often when you talk about orchestras, but it's really true here that they build from a chamber core out into the symphony orchestra, and that I find it palpable in everything we do when we're on form, that everyone is listening as if in a chamber group. And when it gets lost, I can sense in the group there's something strange happening. Everybody's thinking what's happened just now before it coalesces again, and that is a great strength. Listen, we're reaching the end of our time here. You have one more piece to perform for us, and after that I'll say a few words of goodbye to everyone and to you. But could you just introduce this piece for us and tell us what you're giving us?
Sure. Well, this is back to Bach. This is actually the final movement from that same sonata that I played the third movement from it before. So this is the fourth movement, Allegro assai, from his Sonata number 3 in C major.
You have your Strad and your laptop in your hand. Everything of value in your life. Do not fall.
Oh, actually, wow. That was actually my shoulder rest that just fell. No worries.
I mean material value, of course, and emotional with the violin. Yeah.
That would be a dramatic way to finish the broadcast, wouldn't it?
It's such a pleasure for
There you
everyone.
are.
I've been watching as you've been speaking, just scores and scores of questions coming in from you of all different kinds. Many technical questions from violinists, obviously, and then from musicians about repertoire, but also just about your life. So my sense is that we could do another one of these and fill it easily. If you're up for it, maybe in a few weeks' time we could meet again.
Yeah, absolutely. That'd be fun. Yeah, it's really it's nice to connect with friends and talk about the things we love, right?
I agree. And for those of you who sent in messages and we didn't get to them, I'm really sorry. I was trying to build them in as we went rather than leaving them all to the end, and we've run out of time. If you want to hear, fingers crossed, James live at the NAC, take a look at our website where his concerts with us in the 2021 season are available. And those of you who are watching from the US or near New York will be at Carnegie Hall with him on April 28th, 2021. Thank you to all of you for joining us here on our first Musically Speaking. And a big thank you to the sponsors that have made Canada Performs such an important and supportive platform for so many Canadian artists. That is the National Arts Centre, Facebook, Slate Music, Sirius XM Canada, and RBC. I'll be back at the same time, so that's noon East Coast, 5 p.m. in London, 6 p.m. in Berlin, 9 a.m. LA, and so on and so forth, on May 7th and on May 21st, where I'll be speaking to Misha Brugger-Gossman and Jan Leszecki, respectively. On the NAC website, which is nac-cna.ca, you can find lots of really exciting content. Our musicians from the orchestra are daily uploading what are called lunch breaks. It's them playing from their homes, sometimes doing like really unexpected things. It's sometimes not their primary instrument. It's a very exciting forum, so check that out. And you can also sign up for our free weekly home deliveries. That's concerts from our live archive that we're sending out. I'm writing listening guides for you, and you can get that for free every week on a Wednesday night. So if you've enjoyed this, please do that. Sign up to the NAC Orchestra free deliveries. And also follow me on my Facebook page, Instagram, Twitter, whatever you want to get more of this kind of content. Most importantly, stay safe, look after yourselves. Be well, and I hope we see each other very soon. Let's all give a virtual round of applause to James Ehnes for being basically just the most amazing guy ever. And I'll see you all next time.